Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Dunkirk. When you have kind of a big name auteur director who makes like big budget blockbuster type of movies, there's always a time where they want to, or it used to be at least, where they'd want to make their big important kind of war epic or important movie that really is talking about something historical. And usually when that would happen, when you get Spielberg, or what Spielberg did with Schindler's List, for example, or even, what James Cameron did with Titanic, is you see a director who you knew for a certain thing. You love Spielberg for Raiders of the Lost Ark. You love him for his blockbuster mentality. You love Cameron for that before Titanic. Then you see the Schindler's List or Titanic, and they feel drastically different from those films. Although they feel like they're directed by the same director, they don't feel like they would go as easily with their blockbuster fare. And I often thought a lot of what Spielberg would do when he tried to make his prestige stuff, from Empire of the Sun to The Color Purple to Schindler's List to Saving Private Ryan, for example, is something that a blockbuster director wouldn't do now. You don't have your big name directors making big war important films, and certainly not the way you used to, and making it feel like kind of a big important war movie. Dunkirk doesn't really do that. What makes Dunkirk, I think, so special, really, is that what it does is it makes a Christopher Nolan war movie. It feels like a Christopher Nolan war movie. Dunkirk has that kind of propulsiveness, that energy to it. It feels like a real thrill ride, but it also gets you invested in this conflict. Now, not invested in characters. I mean, there are characters in it, and you do end up caring about them, but not in the traditional kind of fleshed out way. That's probably something people will kind of complain about, to have something to complain about, but I didn't notice it really being a problem. I really liked how he used the characters. Apparently, the script only actually had 76 pages. It's not a 76-minute movie if you're doing the screenplay page to minute in the movie ratio nonsense thing that supposedly works, but it is still his shortest movie in like forever, thankfully. But it's mainly done with visuals. There's not a lot of talking. There's this really kind of beauty to what he's doing. Often he talks about how he's influenced by silent film, and often I've wanted to be like, yeah, bullshit. In this film I really felt it. I haven't felt a mainstream blockbuster filmmaker invoke silent film in such a way since Peter Jackson did with the Lord of the Rings trilogy, in such a flawless visual storytelling way. And it's kind of awe-inspiring and beautiful and amazing what he does with this, especially how he shoots Dunkirk and that conflict. There's kind of an odd sense of calm purgatory going throughout most of this film, which almost feels like a foreign filmmaker, like a European filmmaker, but not a Hollywood filmmaker. Like somehow some foreign country's director had a hit and has a lot of money for some reason, and you get to watch this, beautiful epic that made no money in America kind of a movie. And it sort of feels like that in it, with the cinematography by Hoyt van Hoytema, whose cinematography almost I don't think has ever looked as gorgeous with Christopher Nolan as it has with this film, although Hoyt van Hoytema, still his favorite film he shot for me is Let the Right One In, but I still think he did an amazing, beautiful job. There's some really stunning visuals in this film that really stay with me and really leave an impact. There is a real kind of beautiful sense to it, and he does a time thing where there's three storylines going on, one that takes about a week, one that takes a day, and one that is an hour, and one is land, sea, and air, which is the same sequence I said it before. It didn't feel like the first section took a week, to be honest with you, but whatever. The idea that you have these things running in different kind of time streams, basically, you're seeing one thing, it doesn't mean each section is happening at the same time, which for the most part works. I think it probably works because this film isn't a film about character, it's about the event itself. And I think that's actually one of the smartest things Christopher Nolan did with this film. It lets him get away with all his kind of artistic nonsense, which actually works fairly well for the most part, because he does something that I think is probably smarter than most historical kind of biopic-y Oscar bullshit movies, and that's the fact that every time I'm watching them, they always stop and have a section where they kind of talk down to me and tell me some information just so they make sure I know this thing that happened in real life. And they don't adapt the story to make a good movie, and that's what Dunkirk does. But in addition to doing that, since it makes this kind of propulsive, amazing kind of experience, I sort of knew about Dunkirk before, but now I care about Dunkirk. I don't care because you had someone cry cry on the beach and make a big dumb speech or something. I care because it was an amazing experience, and that's what Dunkirk's trying to do. You can tell in this that Christopher Nolan does really care about Dunkirk, the actual evacuation and everything that happened in it, but he doesn't have a scene with Winston Churchill. You don't even see the Nazis, really. I mean, you do, but like, you don't see the Nazi symbols or anything like that. It's kind of really interesting how he really stays to the point on this, especially a filmmaker who his last two films felt like maybe he should have cut things down. This feels very tight and compact for the most part, which is like honestly amazing. You don't see filmmakers get a little more economical as they have more power, and this is like him at the height of his power. He made the most money a director's made since Peter Jackson did for King Kong on this, so he is literally at the height of his powers at this point. He's one of the biggest directors in Hollywood. Since Dark Knight Rises and Interstellar specifically felt like way too long. It felt like just kind of go on, and it felt like they need to be cut down, and I would just try to like kind of quantify exactly, like, it's not like I didn't understand them, but I almost didn't understand his perspective in doing that. Whereas in Dunkirk, I was like, this I can get. And I often question, when you have a World War II film, I think the reason why we're sick of them is because honestly there's like way too many of them, and also because we've had to sit through so many of these things where there's a part where it's like, oh well, now we got to tell you a history lesson. This isn't really trying to give you a history lesson. This is trying to give you such an amazing experience that you will remember Dunkirk. And even though he has ships that were at the original thing, he's talked to tons of veterans, you can tell all of that going throughout it, but he has a real love for this. I haven't seen like Christopher Nolan actually love the kind of subject matter he's making his film about probably since inception. This really feels like a passion project. It gives me a lot of faith in Christopher Nolan. It's probably the film of his I've liked the most since like Memento, to be honest with you. I'm not the biggest fan of his Batman movies. Sorry about that, guys. And I actually haven't seen The Prestige or Insomnia. So under that, guys, I actually really liked it. And I was surprised just because I really liked how compact it was and how just about the conflict it was. Certainly it's about these characters, but it's not really. It's like it focuses through them to tell these various stories and to show you all the different even perspectives of this conflict. From Mark Rylance's character coming in from the sea, they sent like actual civilian ships, like people who just had boats and stuff, to Dunkirk to rescue people, and how they felt about it, how the guys in the air felt about it, the flyers felt about it, how the guys on the ground felt about it, how sad and depressing that whole thing was. And you really get a full embodiment of that conflict from various perspectives, which makes it really interesting. It's not like he's saying like the conflict was just the guys in the air, so he's saying it's just this, it's just that. He's trying to give you as full of an experience of the whole thing as you can, but at Dunkirk and the people who are going to be involved in that conflict, not the politicians and everything like that. And that was so smart because it adds such a propulsiveness to it. It really felt like we were going. Hans Zimmer, by the way, does an amazing score with the ticking of the clock going throughout it, and kind of more of a synthesizer electronic score, which you wouldn't think would work. And at first it was like, whoa, Nolan, what are we doing here? It's a really wonderful score because it really like added so much to it. It's kind of like a John Williams type score where I can't really imagine this film without it, but you can tell the film itself influenced the score in such a way that both kind of complement each other in the best way that music and visuals really should. I often wonder with World War II films, if you're going to adapt something from the past, there's usually a reason in the present you're doing it. And I don't know if Dunkirk really does that, but you don't really need to follow every stupid theory in film history that's out there or anything like that. I think what Dunkirk really does is look at what World War II movies have done and kind of does a completely different thing. Frankly, after Quentin Tarantino killed Hitler, it's kind of been a sort of a dead genre of just, Oscar-y kind of bullshit movies and nothing too interesting. But what Dunkirk does is it goes, well, what if we made this conflict as a blockbuster? What if we made this conflict matter to an audience? And I think that was probably one of the smartest things Nolan's done in a long time. He really wanted you to care about it, and it's through his filmmaking he found a way to do it. I actually like how he casted this film and how he used the actors. Mark Rylance, who used to never be in anything and now he's in lots of stuff, he used him very well. I actually like Kenneth Branagh in something, which I didn't think was possible. Harry Styles was in it, I guess. I liked how he used the mole storyline, those actors in that, whose names I don't really know. I didn't have a hard time differentiating through the English guys. I know they do wear the similar clothes and have the same haircut and stuff like that, and that kind of bothers people. My in-laws are English, so I can tell English people apart. I never had that problem, really. I didn't have that experience, so it seems to be everyone else's problem, not mine. I think the one problem with it is there's certain editing towards the end and the beginning, like the very beginning, that I felt like kind of hurt his argument, whereas I didn't have a problem with the editing through the rest of the whole movie. It was just the beginning and the end. And the beginning of these title cards, which are sort of unnecessary, you kind of figure out what's going on, and the film kind of just expects that you know, like, it's a World War II movie, it's about this thing Dunkirk, and we're gonna show you more about it. And that's sort of all you really need to know. You don't really need a title card at the beginning. I thought that was kind of stupid. I don't know if the studio pushed for that. Since they spent so much money, they're like, oh yeah, you gotta do this, and he did it. I didn't think that was really necessary. I thought that was like a little distracting because I wanted to watch the visuals. I didn't want to like read this fucking title card for whatever dumb reason. And they kept cutting back to it. It was just very distracting. And then at the end, there are parts that I felt like if they just held on certain shots, or even when the timelines are collapsing, certainly, or like kind of coming close together, I didn't feel like that worked as well. And also I noticed people complain about how this feels very epic, it feels very important, it feels very impromptu, you're in it, you're thrilling and all this stuff, and then you realize it feels like kind of like such a smaller conflict. I don't know, it's like I felt like that towards the end of like when they're all evacuating and stuff. Oh, I thought there'd be more towards this thing because I was kind of so used to being in like normal kind of Nolan blockbuster mode. I think he was trying to capture how important this one conflict was, and to do that you can't, you know, overdo it. You have to like capture it in the best way but still be accurate about it, and that is accurate about it because you're just doing this one conflict, this one time when they're trying to evacuate, and how they got so many people out. And that does feel a little more modest than you'd honestly expect from a World War II film, especially one that's supposed to be so important to the director. You expect this big epic conflict at the end that's supposed to have all this meaning and all this crap, and it's like, no, the meaning is everybody got off. That's the meaning, man. Sorry, that's history, that's not a spoiler. I can understand being let down, but I think if you'll watch it in repeat viewings, I think this film will actually hold up fairly well. The problems with it are so minor, which is, honestly, I'm not a Nolan fan really, which is why I put this off. Like, I was like, World War II and Christopher Nolan, just give me a fucking break. And then when I saw it, I was like, I sort of made a mistake. This was really, really good. I really enjoyed it. It's the first time I've really liked a Christopher Nolan movie this much in a long time and not even had any sort of storytelling problem with it. I thought it was really smart how he did it. It was really compact. I hope he keeps making movies like this. It's like someone who realized they don't really like character and they don't really like people's feelings, and they went, fuck it, I'm just gonna do the stuff I like and I'm good at. And he did do that. There's a certain thrillingness to his action sequences that I thought he had lost in his last two films. I didn't feel like that propulsiveness as I felt in Dunkirk, which is just amazing. I'm so glad he found that again, because it's sad when you see a director lose that, but he found it in such a beautiful way. I think this is a film that I was often surprised by, but I was surprised by how it never let me go and kept me invested in it, and not through these small character moments, but through just his constant building and constant all the information that was going on and everything. Felt like he had books and books of info. Cillian Murphy's character in this, about the guy who was attacked from the U-boats, you had Tom Hardy in the plane, you had Mark Rylance in the ocean, you had the guys on the beach and everything. It just felt like he knew a lot of stuff about it, but instead of overriding you with that, he'll just have, you know, the camera show it really quickly. He understood how to show their perspective, and understanding someone's perspective is the best way to teach someone history, because that's when you make it real. Because understanding the unique perspective of being there is exactly how to get people to care about this conflict. And I think that was ultimately what they were trying to do with this movie, and frankly they succeeded. This is probably one of the best World War II movies of this decade, and probably in a really long time, especially in a blockbuster way. It's probably one of the best ones since like Inglourious Bastards, and probably just as fun. Well, not as funny, but just as fun. There was a funness to it. There was a thrillingness to it, but he also respected it. This shows kind of the promise of Christopher Nolan that I thought had gone away. The promise that I used to think about him. It reminded me he directed Memento in the best way. And it reminded me why I liked him. I think all the pretentiousness and everything like that, I've never seen that work for him in such a beautiful way. Dunkirk was the kind of movie that, you know, proved me wrong about Nolan. I honestly love being wrong about good direction in a movie. I love when suddenly I'm proven wrong, because I love going to see a really good kind of propulsive film like this, and I would happily see this film again. And there's not a lot of films where I kind of, well, I guess I gotta go see this thing, and then I leave and go, that was a fine-tuned piece of filmmaking. He really made a kind of really fine-tuned, great World War II film, and a World War II film that got you to be invested and care about the side of World War II, and a conflict in World War II we really don't get to hear about that much outside of England. I think that's what Christopher Nolan succeeded and wanted to do. His artistic intent and his Nolan's artistic and directorial ability is all throughout Dunkirk, and what made it soar and sing and be the kind of crazy, frenetic blockbuster that I think a World War II movie really needed, and needed to make us all remember what Dunkirk was. And I think that's how we're going to remember what this movie is, probably for a really long time. So if you have seen Dunkirk and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.